Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Today, for some of you who have been on the social media, you probably have come across this dialogue by Professor Ibo Mandaza calling for a national dialogue because Zimbabwe is stuck. This is not the first time he has called for this. He's been doing it since 2016. I think there's no denying that Zimbabwe is stuck. The question is, how are we going to get out of it? But before I go to that, let me just play the DVD of this debate where Tendai Biti is explaining, and I think very, very well indeed, the crisis, the political crisis in Zimbabwe. Just listen to this.
A deep structural crisis centering around politics, a disarticulated national vision, toxicity that you have already referred to, Trevor, poverty, captured states, disemboweled and dismembered institutions, be it the judiciary, parliament, and so forth. A deep structural economic crisis of low productivity and huge poverty. So it's a classical status quo of a failed state along the status quo of Somalia and South Sudan. But this crisis is more than 44 years old. It predates independence. It predates colonialism. It predates the liberation struggle. It finds itself perhaps with parentage in the pre-colonial order. And I see many now are now trying to find recourse and legitimacy to Monumtapa. Because there's no model referencing of the kind of authoritarian disorder that they're trying to impose, and they've imposed on Zimbabwe. So I'm reminded of Gramsci when he writes in 1930 that the crisis consists in that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. The old is dead. No one identifies and associates with the old, but the new cannot be born. So we are facing a blocked transition. The last 20 years or 30 years, particularly since the formation of the MDC, has witnessed this blocked transition. So the critical question then is, how do we unblock a blocked transition, an arrested transition, a hijacked a transition? And the challenge now is that democratic methods of addressing the structural crisis in Zimbabwe have failed. The electoral project and the electoral polity in Zimbabwe has failed and failed in absolute terms. And when the democratic project fails, it makes inevitable undemocratic means. We saw what happened in 2017, and as I'm talking to you right now, all the ingredients of another implosion are there on the ground. And what are those? An economy that is not performing. What are those? Huge, massive corruption. What are those? Identity politics, tribalism, ethnicity. What are those? Cockpit dissonance, particularly in Zanu PF, we are told that a president can hardly talk to his vice president. A vice president can't even attend the birthday party of his principal. So the evidence of discord are there to see, and regrettably, the only inevitable outcome is another implosion, such as the one we saw in 2017. So the issue is not when there will be an implosion. The issue is how and in what form, and what are the outcomes. So we are suffering what I've called this blocked transition, which has seen Zimbabwe hemorrhaging literally and metaphorically for the last 44 years.
I'll stop it right there. I think the important thing to notice here, maybe just to explain that you'll go on to the whole panel anyway, agreed that what is the way forward is the country needs a national transition authority, which will then implement the political and economic changes necessary to take back the country. The big question that must be asked is why we are where we are. This National Transition Authority is no more than another version of the GNU of 2008 to 2013. All the panelists there will go on, if one was to listen to right to the end of it, to agree that that National Transition Authority will only work if it has got the backing of SADC. And I think that is very true. But the question is, why would SADC want to back another GNU in Zimbabwe? When they did back the one in 2008 to 2013, and it accomplished nothing. That is, I think, the big issue that we as a nation are failing to address here.
Good day to everybody. I think, yes, you are right to say, it's a very, very big issue. But for me, I would want to start probably with a primary. We have had these guys for a very long time. They've been on the political scene in Zimbabwe for a very, very long time, and they held key positions, during the GNU and during their political outside the GNU. Actually, they've accomplished nothing. Rightfully, like you said, SADC would, if I was SADC, I would be asking the same question to say, why would I go and help and back these guys up when the last time I facilitated something so that they could at least free themselves of this oppression, and they turned around and made a laughing stock out of me, and not once, so many times. So my issue with this gentleman is, you have been in the political front for a very long time. You have very little to show in terms of accomplishment. All is just talk. Every time when we're heading towards another election or whatever, you come up with these ideas, fancy talk, sit down, agree we are going to do this, and then put ideas forward, and get people all worked up, and we're back on the campaign trail. It's the same thing over and over. If people cannot see this, this is why we are in this mess, because of people like this.
to underline that point, we have to understand and be honest with ourselves. Why did the 2008 to 2013 GNU fail to deliver even one token reform? Because unless you identify the problems, then you're likely to repeat the same problems, the same mistakes that you made then. And I think the obvious mistake here is the 2008 to 2013 GNU did present the golden opportunity for Zimbabwe to implement the democratic reforms. And not even one reform was implemented. Why? Because Robert Mugabe bribed the MDC leadership with the trappings of high office, the ministerial limousines, the generous salaries for Morgan Tsvangirai, the $4 million mansion in Highlands. And the MDC leaders forgot about the reforms. This is at the heart of the problem. This was not a mistake. It's not that they made a mistake. This was a case of leaders being corrupt. And if you're going to have the same leaders, the same corrupt and incompetent leaders in this new national transition authority, what hope is there that those reforms will be implemented? None. So you're just repeating the same mistake. If you look at last year's election, even now with the benefit of hindsight, MDC leaders participated in those flawed elections, knowing fully well the process is flawed, knowing fully well that by participating, they'll give Zanu PF legitimacy. They still went ahead and participated regardless. That is where the problem is, out of greed. So the greed has continued. SADC leaders condemned those elections. So did the AU, but they could not go the extra mile and deny Zanu PF political legitimacy because MDC Triple C leaders had participated in those flawed elections. And they had conned their followers to participate in their millions. Nearly 2 million Zimbabweans voted for Chamisa in last year's elections, according to the ZEC result. So if the Triple C opposition leaders are so corrupt that they themselves acknowledge that the process is flawed, but they still went ahead and participated in it out of greed, we are going to have the same individuals in this new proposed National Transition Authority. What will change? Nothing. And I don't think SADC will ever buy this National Transition Authority proposal until we Zimbabweans are being honest for a change and acknowledge where we've made mistakes and are willing to say, okay, we have had some corrupt and incompetent leaders. Let's have some competent leaders for a change.
You know, maybe viewers may think that, you know, we are a negative bunch and we don't want to see, you know, ideas and all that. But I mean, let's look at facts, right? Tendai BT is on record stating that Zimbabwe elections are criminal, they are illegal. He said that with his own mouth. But you find out that straight after saying all those things, he was one that was campaigning and wanting to go into elections, regardless of the fact that just yesterday he's just condemned the process. If that is not greed or selfishness, what then is? So, and I must agree with you, it's a noble idea to have a transitional authority, to try and move things forward. But you cannot have these guys in it. And knowing them, they want to be part of it. They will never, we are recycling dead wood. There's absolutely no fresh idea they can bring out. I mean, we were just talking about Dr. Ibo Mandaza was also on record saying his close friends in SADC said, they're going to come in, there's going to be a transitional authority, we spent the whole year discussing of things that are non-existent. And let me rest assure you, Zanu PF has already started planning to rig the 2028 elections. All these guys will participate in those 2028 elections, even after they have had this meeting to talk about the toxicity of the political environment in Zimbabwe. They will participate regardless, knowing fully well that ZANU PF will rig the election. They will participate and prolong our suffering. Why? Selfishness and greed. Period.
So I think, in conclusion, as much as we would want this National Transition Authority, and to be quite honest, I honestly think it is the way forward for Zimbabwe. We cannot continue with this cycle of participating in rigged elections to give ZANU PF legitimacy. But this National Transition Authority, at the present moment, I don't see it happening. Because like I said, I don't see SADC wanting to be dragged into Zimbabwe's political crisis when all they can see is us repeating the same problem over and over again. The way forward, the way I see it, is that we must demonstrate to SADC that we are ready for meaningful political change. First of all, by accepting why the last GNU failed. And by being honest and saying the leadership was corrupt and incompetent. This issue of saying, no, we don't want to dig up the past because it will divide us is nonsensical. It only shows that we have not learned from the past. We must be honest with ourselves. And in this particular case, it's even more important because we'll stop blaming SADC for our own shortcomings. That is point number one. Point number two, I don't think there's any point in talking SADC to backing a national transition authority at this point in time. The best we can do right now is talk to those CCC supporters and explain to them, if it takes 100 times explaining it to them, to hammer it into their heads, that they cannot keep on believing in these idiotic lies from the likes of Chamisa, claiming that they've plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. The truth of the matter is he has not done so. SADC, the AU, last year confirmed that those election processes were flawed. This is after Chamisa had said he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. They could see that that was a lie. The MDC, CCC, Chamisa Chete supporters must open their eyes and see that this is just a lie. We cannot keep on participating in these flawed elections in our millions, because as long as we do that, we leave SADC no other option except Zanu PF. I am convinced that if Zimbabweans had not participated in last year's elections in their millions, SADC would have denied Zanu PF political legitimacy. SADC would have seen that Zimbabweans are now serious about having free, fair, and credible elections. They are now focused on what needs to be changed. They are now determined to see that elections are free, fair, and credible. That is our number one task. We can demand all we want, this National Transition Authority. Ask SADC to back it. As long as we are going in that with the same mentality that we had when we went into the 2008 to 2013 GNU, I do not think, if I was SADC, I'll be tempted to back the Zimbabweans. Because this is just history repeating itself. We do not need a national transition authority at the moment. What we need is to make sure that 2028, our Chamisa Chete friends do not participate in those flawed elections in their millions. If we can accomplish that, SADC will back us up and deny Zanu PF political legitimacy. And if they were to do that, that would deliver the country into yet another National Transition Authority or GNU, call it whatever you like. But at that point, SADC at least will have some confidence that Zimbabweans are finally focusing on the real issues affecting the country.
In conclusion, I would say Zanu PF has already started their plans of rigging in the next election, or even postponing them. And let me also note by saying Zanu PF is on record to say they will not have any dialogue outside Poland. So whatever, national dialogue these guys are talking about, clearly they are living in their own world, because you cannot talk when somebody does not want to talk back with you. So that day is a case closed. My main worry and my main, objective here is we've already lost 1 year with, SADC this, SADC that. I heard from a close source that this is going to happen and nothing has happened. We've lost a year and we are getting closer to the next election. Our fight, and if we're not careful, our fight is for the fight to have free, fair, and credible elections by 2028. That is our fight. That is our main objective. And if we cannot do that, and if we cannot achieve that, we have another term of Zanu PF to look forward to. So enough of all this here, listening to these guys here talking every single time, and bringing absolutely no result. We have been told by SADC, we have been given recommendations, and those recommendations are just as simple as reforms. All we just need is to get those tabled and implemented. The fight starts now so that we can have a free, fair, and credible 2028 election. Forget about all this other, these are side shows, and that will never happen. But 2028 will happen. And if we do not put our house in order, Zanu PF will rig. And that is a fact. Zanu PF will rig these elections. And we will have another term of hardship. The choice is us to continue listening and dilly-dallying with these gentlemen, or to do the right thing. And then, like you said, SADC will acknowledge that they are ready. Thank you.
My closing remark would be, I think it is important that Zimbabweans should not give up. The scenario that Tendai BT described, that the country is ripe for yet another military coup. And this time, it may not be one where there's no serious threat to lives and property. This time it could be much worse. We could avoid it. But I think the best way to avoid it is, like I said, to focus on making sure we do not keep on participating in flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy. That is our number one priority, and it is an achievable goal. As much as we need SADC to help us, at the present moment, SADC's appetite to help us is not there, as we saw last year. As much as they condemned the election, they could not go the extra mile and deny Zanu PF political legitimacy, because they really did not see how that would change anything, given that the key players, Triple C, and millions of Zimbabweans participated in those flawed elections. Nothing would have changed. They were not given much of a choice. And that we have got to blame ourselves, not blame SADC, as some people keep doing. I repeat, we should encourage Zimbabweans to seriously search for a solution out of this mess. But the proposed National Transition Authority that Mandaza, Dr. Abel Mandaza and his friends are proposing, as a way forward. I do not, in my humble opinion, see that as the solution at all. Thank you very much for those of you who were able to join us this afternoon, and have a good evening.